So originally I'd been planning for this session to take place at the Forgotten Lake, but upon arrival there were a couple of other people fishing, and I know how line shy those fish are, and I was sort of racking my brains for somewhere else to go, and I was reminded of this rather nice common carp that I caught earlier in the year from another nearby water during just a plain old fishing session, not a filming session. And so rather stay on the banks of the Forgotten Lake, I thought I'd pay this other water another visit. And during my first trip there, I'd seen a couple of bigger mirrors, including a couple of scaly ones, which kind of stood out to me, and I thought I'd like to catch. Now this is complete opposite to the Forgotten Lake. It's a lot deeper, it's smaller, it's a lot more coloured, and it contains a lot more fish. But a couple of them are better fish, and whilst that might always be a relative term, the biggest fish in the lake is the biggest fish in the lake, whether it's a 6-pounder or a 36-pounder. And this is really the type of water that led me down the route of using a centre pin and older tackle, because to fish somewhere like this with modern tackle, where you're not necessarily fishing for PB sized fish, is a bit uninspiring for me. But if you can create a challenge by using tackle that makes you work that bit harder, you can still have a really good time and feel that you've accomplished something if you are able to pick out the bigger fish. It can also be incredibly frustrating, because I know with even a cheap carbon rod and fixed ball reel I'd be able to hit the far bank, but with a centre pin and 75-year-old rod, even getting halfway can be quite a challenge. But the fish were there, and the bigger fish, the obvious way to target the bigger fish is off the top, but they know this too, so they tend to hold very tight in the lilies. And I managed to get them going between the lilies, but whenever they got within casting range of the bank or close to the bank, they'd make sure they were somewhere inaccessible and only take baits out in open water, which made them much harder to hit. And so that was a challenge in itself, because normally I'd trim my hook baits right down to the smallest possible size to make them as easy as possible to take. But these fish, they were coming to the bank, but they were staying under the trees, and in open water they'd look at a bait, but they'd be spitting it out before you could strike. And as I say, there was plenty of smaller fish feeding within a rod length of the bank, but the bigger ones were really only taking out in the middle. And as satisfying as fishing with old gear is, it's also incredibly frustrating when it's not working for you. But that's almost part of the enjoyment. But I started to enjoy it a little bit less and less each time I missed a fish. And when I missed the third one and started spooking everything else in the margins, I thought that maybe it was a time for a bit of a rethink. Now the breeze had been swirling about, and it had pushed bait up into the margins away from where I was fishing, and I'd been seeing the odd shape and feeding swirls coming out from almost underneath the bank. There's a big undercut and the fish feed right underneath. So I thought maybe that was a better place to concentrate on, and I baited a couple of spots around the lake. But even here, the better fish, and this is one of the mirrors, they're very cute. You can see them and they will take the odd bait, but without a competitive feeding situation, they will just take them from under the bank where you can't really fish, or from an inaccessible area. So maybe what they lack in size they make up for in cunning. And up the other end there's a fallen tree, and there's definitely some of the bigger fish that like to sit the other side of this fallen tree. They know it's a safe zone for them. But I put in quite a few freebies in amongst the reeds on this side of the tree, and I got a few fish that come through and started taking. And the trick is to keep the fish on a tight line, plunge the rod underwater and get them away from the snag. Now unfortunately I knew straight away this wasn't one of the bigger mirrors, but it did look like one of the scaly mirrors. And it's got surprisingly good depth for such a small pond, or such a small lake, and the fish do tend to just go down. They don't run a huge amount, but they do like to plod about, hug the bottom, which is good in some ways and frustrating in others. But having got the fish away from the snag, it was a fairly straightforward fight. As I say, I knew it wasn't one of the bigger ones, but it did look like one of the pretty ones, and it's very definitely a fully scaled mirror. Now I spoke to a bailiff, and actually he said that these sort of shorter, deeper fish are stocked fish. When they were stocked I don't know, but he did also mention that the original mirrors tend to be more greyish, and those are the ones I've been missing out in the open water. But also there was a couple of scaly ones, scaly originals, a lot longer and more torpedo shaped. So I thought I'd stick it out and see if I couldn't find one of those, because, say, despite not considering myself a big carp angler or a target angler, I do like sort of picking out a fish and going for that fish. And I thought I'd found one down at the other end. Now this fish came in with a couple of others, so there's a slight competitive feeding situation which made it slightly keener to take a hook bait, and because it was so close to the bank I'd been able to trim the hook bait right down, so it's not much bigger than a size 12 hook. And again this fish just wanted to plunge straight down, and it was almost trying to come back underneath me. It was, I don't know how big the undercut is, but it felt like it was almost underneath my feet at certain times. It really was putting the poor old holdfast through its paces. And I thought I'd had a chance to net it, but it powered off. We had to go through the whole thing again, but at the next time of asking I made no mistakes and got her to the net. And I could instantly see it was a different type of fish, a different strain of fish, once I saw it in the net, with these incredible large scales. Down the entire length of its body. From this side I'd almost call it a fully scaled mirror. Certainly one of the originals. From the other side I'm not so sure. Maybe call it a heavily scaled mirror. But either way, it was an immaculate fish. So I've caught a fully scaled, a heavily scaled, a common. I just need to catch one of the grey mirrors now, and then I can cross this one off the list.